Thank you. Thanks, Sheldon. Appreciate it very much. It really is a pleasure to be here. We have a lot in common with the people in the room in terms of just the sheer size of our school district. We're the third largest employer in this community, and we leave an indelible mark in lots and lots of different ways. The mission of our school district is to ensure that each student, every student, graduates from high school ready to meet the demands beyond high school: work, college, service in the military, and others, and that they continue to contribute to the community in which they live. This is important to each of those students, and it's important to each of us that we live in. As the superintendent of Juneau schools, it's my job to ensure that as a school district, we get better every year at delivering on that mission. Our strategic plan, which you can find on our website, and you can find the deeper details on the website, is a succinct outline of our deliberate and focused effort to do just that, deliver on the mission. These 9 interrelated initiatives represent our theory of action for improving our effectiveness with each student, every student. In January, our school board adopted these 7 indicators of success. These indicators align with the strategic plan and help us monitor our progress, focus our accountability for improvement. For each indicator that you see on the screen, there's a specific target, a specific tool of measurement, and a specific individual or group that is accountable for its attainment. We are doing things differently than we have done in the past. We're focusing our curriculum. We're monitoring student progress systemically. We're investing in teacher and leadership effectiveness. We're improving our business practices. As a result, we're seeing success. Graduation rates are up at each of our 2 comprehensive high schools. Reading achievement is up in relation to national standards, a 4-year high for reading achievement. And just a footnote here, many of you know that we choose to use the national standards because they're considerably higher than the state standards. State standards are substantially below the national level. And I think it's important to note that the Alaska Department of Education is revising the state standards to bring them in line with the higher expectations at the national level. And I think they need to be applauded for that. Math achievement is up, also the strongest it has been in 4 years. Through a focus on higher standards, effective teaching, leadership development, and closer monitoring of student progress, we are doing things differently in our community school district. We're investing in research-based teaching strategies, such as AVID programs. AVID stands for Advancement via Individual Determination. It's a program that is showing strong results in only its 2nd year of implementation. This program will dramatically increase the number of our Alaska students in Juneau who qualify for the new Alaska Performance Scholarship, a program that supports Alaska's youth scholars and their continued learning. We're establishing a refreshment cycle for outdated technology equipment. This is equipment that fails on a routine basis and interferes with the instructional process when it does. And we are investing in instructional materials to support our teachers with the tools they need to be effective. Since everyone's talking about it, let's talk about the budget. In the budget process, we have 2 fundamental responsibilities. We have a responsibility to the mission, which is to increase our success with the students we serve, and that's determined by what their success is. We also have a legal responsibility, and that is that we have to present a balanced budget. We don't get to present a budget, just like you don't in your business. We don't get to present a budget that doesn't end up in the black. We receive funding from 3 basic sources: state legislature, city and borough of Juneau assembly, grants from federal governments, and other grants. 90% of our budget pays for salaries and benefits. We're projecting a multi-million-dollar gap that you've been reading about quite a bit and hearing about. The gap is between the revenue we believe will be available and the programs we need to continue our success with students. A gap we anticipate will be somewhere between $3.9 and $5.8 million. Like most in this room, we have limited resources and we have to manage our costs. We are trying to do that. Our legislators are at work, and some have proposed increases in state funding. We don't know yet what the outcome of those proposals are likely to be, and we aren't likely to know for weeks, perhaps months. Regardless of the outcome of the funding, we have to manage our costs. To do that, we're proposing additional changes in the way we do our work and additional reductions in the numbers of employees who do it. In this effort, we're focused on making those reductions as far from the classroom as possible. Our budget seeks to protect the instructional core, the interaction between a teacher and her students in relation to content. We hear often that the first place to look is to reduce administration. We reduced administration last year by nearly 6% and are again focusing our reductions there this year. School and program administrators are being reduced by an additional 12% in the current proposal. In our main office at 1208 Glacier Avenue, we're eliminating 23% of the jobs, including the role of the assistant superintendent. Our classified staff are those people on the ground level supporting schools, custodians, secretaries, teachers' aides. Our certified staff are teachers, counselors, and librarians. Of those certified employees proposed to be cut, less than 5% are classroom teachers. We're trying to stay as far away from the classroom as possible. In all, there are more than 67 positions proposed for elimination. This will have a profound effect on our work, on these individuals and their families, and on our local economy. Here's the timeline related to our budget process. As you can see, we are required to complete our budget process before our legislature adjourns. So it's possible that we will need to finalize a budget before we know what the revenue is. Did we have this slide that had the economic impact on it? Okay. Whatever our resource challenges might be, we will use the resources to pursue the mission. The mission is non-negotiable. A balanced budget is non-negotiable. That mission is to ensure the success of every student. And as we try to remind ourselves and everyone in our organization, we mean each one, everyone. And our job is to be sure that they graduate prepared to succeed beyond high school and in our communities. I want to acknowledge that there are many people in this room, in the audience today, who make important contributions to our work. In our schools every day, several of you volunteer. Several of you serve on committees. Several of you donate resources to our programs, support student activities, and much more. I want to stop and take questions, but before I do that, I would ask you to join me in thanking those people who do all of those things, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Thank you very much. We left time for questions.
Could you go back and address that economic impact figure, the slide with the $11 million?
Thank you. Clearly, the school district doesn't have the internal expertise to predict economic impact. It's not our expertise, and we don't pretend to do that. As we were thinking about the proposed reductions, our first thought was about what's the impact on the mission to the school district, and it's significant. Then, of course, our thoughts are, what's the impact on our kids? What does it mean for their school experience? And then we were, as we were thinking further about this, we thought, this isn't just something that affects us. It affects our community. And, we get lots of conversations in this community about jobs being moved to other places. And as we thought about the equivalent of a full-size school bus filled with talent leaving, we wondered what the overall impact would be to the community. So I called Brian Holtz at the Juneau Economic Development Council, and I said, is there a way to quantify this? And he said yes. And so we gave him the information he needed in order to do the calculation, and that's the figure he came up with, over $11 million negative impact to our community.
You mentioned that the two mainstream schools were improved in reading and math. What about where has that school?
We talked about the, relative to the two comprehensive high schools, the graduation rate is up there. The graduation rate at Yacouce, because of its population and the mobility of its population in and out, is like a yo-yo. It's a very difficult even to compare their data from one year to another. So if we look at the statistics, not to dodge the question, if we look at the statistics, they're down. But a week later they could be up because kids graduate from Yacouce regularly, like monthly. There are kids who, I was walking over to JDHS the other night, late afternoon, and a young lady was walking next to us, and we struck up a conversation, and we asked how she was doing. She indicated she was a student at Yacouce, and she said, and I'm graduating next week. So, that's a common conversation at Yacouce. They don't finish in the schedule that many of us finished in, but the key thing is they finish. But thanks for the question. It's just a hard thing to put a number on.
Glenn, could you talk about doing things differently this year and over the last few years? And one of those I understand is the AVID program, and I understand that is having a real positive impact. Could you explain to people more about what that program entails, and if there's one or two other things that really that you're thinking about when you say doing things different?
Great, thanks, Brian. Yes, I'd be happy to. I could keep you here until this evening. We could just order dinner now, talking about AVID and what it means in the life of a child. So I'm going to propose a scary thought here. Go back to high school. Think about when you were in high school and you had this 6 classes or 7 classes or 5 classes. Depends on when you went, how many classes you had. And one of those classes each day was a class where it was an elective class where you went to that classroom with a group of peers and you learned how to succeed. You learned how to take detailed notes that actually had value for you when you were studying. You learned how to ask questions about things you didn't understand. You learned how to study effectively. You learned how to apply your learning to problem solving. You learned how to participate in a Socratic dialogue in a way that was actually beneficial for you, and it wasn't just chatting, right? It was a purposeful conversation. That's what students learn in the AVID classroom. They also learn that college is possible. And it doesn't have to be college, but the skills to prepare for college, the personal skills to prepare for college, are very closely aligned with the personal skills you need to be an electrician in this community, to be a person who gets into a career track in our mine. The skills are not that different. So you learn those skills in AVID. Then you have this notebook that you carry from place to place to place, and every one of your teachers knows you're an AVID kid and you need to have that notebook. And if you ask the AVID kids, and there are about 50 in each of our high schools and each of our middle schools now, and there will be 75 in each of our high schools and each of our middle schools next year, and it will continue to expand. Those teachers ask the students to have those notebooks, and the kids will tell you, if you ask them, list the 3 things that make you more successful than you were when you were in AVID, they'll list a teacher who cares, the opportunity to really understand that advanced placement class I never would have taken. I never would have taken that. Now I'm taking it, and I'm outperforming other kids who don't have AVID. And then the third thing is that notebook. And then you ask them what they dislike the most, and they say that notebook. Right? They don't like it. It's kind of like, my mom's strict, but I love my mom because she's strict. Right? So we have data. It's very preliminary data. The program's only been in place for a year and a half. But what we see is the kind of gains that our AVID students are having. Now remember, AVID students, almost by definition, are students who grow up in families where nobody has been to college before. And they're showing greater growth than non-AVID kids. When you put the two groups side by side. And I'll tell you that if you'd like to see an AVID classroom, call my office. I'll take you. The picture I will give you just on the human side, because what we do is human, is that I took, in a previous school district, I took 7 what school folks would refer to as suits, district office administrators, into a middle school AVID class when an AVID kid was presenting. They knew we were coming, but they didn't know when we were coming. And this kid was giving the presentation. 7 suits sat in the back of the room and cried, because this kid was talking about his plans, his goals, and he was learning how to not only have those goals, but how to plan for them, what he needed to do to make it happen, and how he could get to college. So AVID is one of the examples. The other thing I want to say about AVID is, when we do the training for what the instructional strategies are related to AVID, we do it with the AVID elective teacher, and we do it with the core teachers in English, social studies, science, mathematics. So when this student moves from place to place, they're encountering teachers who've been involved in the training. And our middle schools are getting dangerously close to having every teacher in the school trained. What does that do? It lifts it for everybody, right? So that's the investment that we're talking about. Some other things that we're doing differently that may resonate with you is we're involved in a process and performance management system where we're looking internally at the way we do business, and we're asking questions, what doesn't work? And we're putting teams of people together on fixing things that don't work. Simple things like how parents register. How many of you have registered children for school? How many of you, now, just raise your hand with one hand. Now, if you've registered for more than that, if you've registered for 2, put your other hand up too. If it was 3, right? And the reason I ask you to do that is because each time you had to fill out all the paperwork for all of them. And then next year you did it again. What we're trying to do, and we've moved, first thing we did was to get all of the registration packets as common as possible. We had registration packets for some schools that 3 times you signed for the same permission. Right? It doesn't make sense. It was there, but the purpose of this process is to clean that up. The goal that this registration committee has is that you should be able to, maybe from home, maybe from a kiosk in the office, register your students online and never change it again unless you move, change guardians, or enroll in a new program, meaning you have to sign athletic permission. Okay? So that's good for kids. It's really better for you. The key for us, though, as an organization is, 1, customer service to you. But imagine every one of those forms has to be handled. Every one of those forms has to be handled more than once by multiple people for each of your children each year. So what we're getting is, for example, one of the reductions we're making in the finance department is because we improved our processes and we need 1 less person to get it done. And we'll see other opportunities for reductions, but mostly what we're getting is recovering opportunity costs to provide better service. I'm reluctant to take a question from that table, but I'll do it. Mac?
Glenn, I've got a middle schooler and a high schooler, and when you touched on process improvement, improving the district. our kids, as they've gone through the district, have had the benefit of some outstanding teachers. I mean, we're blessed with some excellent teachers in this district. I think it's also fair to say that there are some that are less than excellent teachers in our district. And what can you do, what can the district do, and what is the district doing to try to measure performance of teachers, number one, and correct performance of teachers in those situations that improvement needs to occur, and then third, if necessary, move teachers out who don't meet some minimal standard.
Thanks. Great question. It's really clear in the work that we do that the most important thing that happens, the reason we showed you the slide with the instructional core, the teacher and her student, what they're doing in the presence of content, that's the most important thing that happens in schools. It's the most important thing. And so the quality of that is the most important thing. So Max's question is at the heart of what we do. So what do? Well, we just this year initiated a new teacher evaluation process. And for the first time in our school district, we can now take student learning into consideration as a part of the evaluation process. Let's be candid. We had a number of years where some teachers, more than you and I want to count, weren't evaluated at all. So as near as they knew, they were doing fine. We have solidified that every employee is entitled to feedback, and the organization benefits by giving them feedback. So we have strengthened that, created a higher expectation for that for supervisors and administrators. So if we get down to that, now we expect people to use the process, right? Instead of having a process that is functionally optional. If we get people to use the process, then the next thing is to have them be really good at it. So we have a partnership with the University of Washington Center for Educational Leadership in which we look at a 5-dimension instructional model. High quality expectations for teachers, and we're in the process of training all of our administrators in that process and calibrating what the expectations are from one school to another. So when I'm looking for this particular dimension, what does quality look like versus not so quality? And if I were you, I'd be wondering, well, why isn't this happening? Shouldn't it be happening already? Well, it wasn't. So my job as the superintendent of schools in Juneau is for us to get better every year. That's where we are in the getting better part. So when teachers aren't being effective, and for that matter when principals aren't being effective, or custodians or maintenance workers aren't being effective, our job is to give them feedback and help them get better. That's our first priority, is to help them get better. We spend a lot of time and energy bringing people to our organization, like you do, and our job is to help them be high performing. If they can't, there are specific steps we can go through that are increase in intensity, and it is possible for people to lose their jobs. And we've had people who have.
Thank you for speaking to us today. Getting back to the slide where the budget and so much of that comes from the legislature, how come you guys don't coincide you're turning in your budget to the end of the legislative session just so they're more aligned together?
The dates that we take our budgets forward are in law, and the City and Borough of Juneau also has to be presenting its budget, so the two things are out of whack. One of the ways in which the legislature addressed this in the past so that we don't have this ambiguity is to do what's referred to as forward funding. So basically to determine this is the amount of funding for this year, next year, and the year after that. Last couple of years we haven't done that. Lots of places in the lower 48 don't do that, and it contributes to chaos in the planning because it pressurizes everything as opposed to being really thoughtful and strategic in our planning. We would love to have those two things coincide.
regarding enrollment. How's our enrollment doing? And then second, I haven't heard much about the drug testing program and the voluntary drug testing program. Could you comment on it as well?
So that's actually 3, Brad. And so if you remember being in school, when you see 3, that's multiple choice. So do I get to pick? So the first question was enrollment. We're projecting that our enrollment will drop by about 25 students next year. And so the long-term forecast is it's going to drop a little bit, and then it's going to start climbing again. So, and there are people who do this based on births and a whole bunch of other economic factors, that sort of thing. And, you know, I think, gosh, if I could get within 100, if somebody was asking me, I'd feel pretty good. Last year, for the projection last year for this year was off by 3. Right? Not bad. So to answer your question, it looks like it's going to drop by about 25. Drug testing. We continue to have mandatory drug testing. We're just past the 2-year mark from when we implemented that. And by every way that we can think about measuring it, from how many kids are showing up positive to what's the conversation in the hallways, it has had a profound effect on the culture in our schools. I won't stand here today and tell you that no one ever has a beer in their car, no one ever has something in their locker. That's just not true. We find out about it, there are consequences for it, and sometimes it shows up in the drug testing. But I can tell you that the number of positives in the drug testing on the mandatory side is less than 1%. Less than 1%. And there are people in this room who, I was going to say encouraged, but that's just completely inaccurate, who demanded that the school district do this. And when I came here, that was a decision that was being made, and I learned about it in the interview. And so it isn't something we would say, yeah, that's what a school district should do. But after hearing the testimony about the challenges our kids were facing in being confronted with drugs, it turns out whatever your thoughts are, my thoughts are, it was the right thing to do. So it's going pretty smoothly, going well. We've had a few athletes who have been disqualified, but not hordes of them. And I think it helps our coaches. John could tell you whether or not it helps him. The voluntary side, we have a pretty strong number of students who get involved in that. The number changes from time to time. But there are people in this room who contribute a great deal of resources to that, and so the incentives are out there, and it's a good thing. We spend less than $40,000 a year on drug testing in a $90 million budget.
Would you speak to your slide on the reading competencies and the values associated with measuring and increasing literacy?
Well, one of the things that we've tried to do is to make sure that students receive focused, disciplined reading instruction. And we have great teachers. Someone said it. We have great teachers. But our teachers have been left to just do what they can figure out to do among themselves, which is not a bad thing. But what happens is you end up with reading programs from one school to another that are dramatically different. And as many of you know, our families move around, right? So if you're a student who's doing pretty well here and you move, first you move and you've got a whole different social dynamic. So picture being 7 and you've moved, you have a whole new set of friends, and the reading instruction is completely different than what you saw 18 blocks away. Okay? So the first thing we've done is not try to narrow the curriculum too rigidly, but to get some basic expectations around what literacy instruction looks like. And we've got great teachers who are able to do it, and they've been responsive. We've tried not to be too heavy-handed about that, so depend on who you ask. Some will say we were, some will say you haven't cranked it up tight enough. But we've been really intentional about that. The other is we implemented an assessment system that allows us to look at data, allows teachers together to look at data and say, so how are the kids doing? Which is the most important question. If the most important work is the teacher and the student, the most important question is, how is the student doing? So those are the two primary things. And we elevated the standards for reading. We moved them up. Fast forward a couple of years, I'll bet we move them up again.
I guess it's my turn. Glenn, thanks so much for coming today, and I appreciate all the work that you and the board and the district are doing. Getting back to the
I
budget.
did mention the secretary's bill. I really did.
I know. My wife is in Riverbend, so it's like being pointed. With regard to the budget, most recent iteration that I had read prior to your most recent discussion had three elements that I've been receiving some feedback and wanted to question about. One was about a $1.3 million addition to the budget, which was grant monies for positions that had gone away. We were looking to add that back to the budget. And the other two items were a decrease in paraeducator funding, which speaks to the core that we're talking about. When we lose paraeducators, it directly impacts student learning in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And then the third issue was safety with regard to the decrease in nurses and the replacement, I think, with a health technician. Could you speak to those three things and how they're impacting it, and maybe what the current discussion is at the board level about those three items?
Thank you. I'll try to remember them. So we have nursing, aides, and the additions into the budget. What are the additions? Well, globally, I'll tell you that the additions, from my point of view, if my job is to ensure that we have greater success, even in a declining resource environment, those additions into the budget are necessary. They're completely necessary. They're not sort of necessary. They're completely necessary, or we won't have a very good answer to how are the kids doing. So it is things like AVID, which has been grant funded to date, and that grant is expiring. We intend to apply for another grant to do that, but we can't make the continuation of this program, given its power to change what happens in our schools. We can't leave that to chance. So if we happen to get a grant, we can offset some of those costs. We'd have a greater ending fund balance for next year, and we could get off of the fiscal roller coaster. So another is computer technology. We don't have a refreshment cycle. In almost all of your businesses, you have a refreshment cycle for things that wear out, right? You plan, right? You plan. Not Weyerhaeuser's plan, or Westinghouse's plan for obsolescence, but you plan that things are going to wear out. We haven't. We should have, but we haven't. And now that we are, it's an additional expense in the budget that would be ongoing. Why would that be important? Why can't we put that off another year? Why can't we wait until we have better times? Because the equipment is interfering with instructional practice today. It did yesterday, it will tomorrow. If we don't invest, then we're going to continue to interfere with the instructional process. Instructional assistants. We believe that there is a small reduction in FTE for paraeducators that primarily work with special needs children. We believe that, based on who our students are, we don't need all of those positions. Now, we're actually eliminating a pretty small number. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's a pretty small number. The other thing that we're doing in relation to that is, for those who are full-time, meaning 8-hour instructional assistant, we are compacting their time so that they are there the full time the student is there and the full time the teacher is there. What we're saying is, if the students aren't there and the teacher isn't there, we believe that while it would be nice to have the staff there to do other things, their core mission is to help specific groups of students. And if the students are gone and the teacher who's responsible for the instruction is gone, then why don't we just let the paraeducator also go home? Now, I don't say that, I don't mean to sound callous about that, because it has an impact on that employee. It reduces, it increases their contribution to their benefits. It reduces their salary by a half an hour, one part of half of, 1/16th, right? So that's that proposal. The other one, which is getting lots and lots of attention, and it's appropriate because people worry about it, is we're proposing a model where we would use nurses for nurses for services that are required for a nurse to do. And there are things that our nurses do, and we have great nurses. We just recognized 2 of our nurses who became nationally certified on their own time with their own money and their own blood, sweat, and tears, and one of them even traveled because she couldn't take the test in Seattle. She traveled, I want to say New York, somewhere on the East Coast. She paid her way to go back there and take the test. So this is not a question about the value of our nurses. The question is, do we need a nurse to do all those things, or could we do that with someone who was well trained on the specific skills and the support for those kids? And clearly, given that, when you get into this medical part of the stuff, we worry a lot. I have to be candid, to be transparent. This model is used around the country, and the people in those school districts don't care any less about kids than we do. They don't care any less about the safety and well-being of the kids there than we do here. The issue is change, and the impact on those employees, those nurses that would no longer be with us, right? These are our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors. So those are the 3 topics.
Thank you. I have a question not on behalf of the university, but as a parent. I have a junior at Thunder Mountain High School, as you know. But my question is, with the Alaska Performance Scholarship and with the university scholarship, the top 10%, there's some wonderful opportunities now for young students in the Juneau School District to go to school and have financial assistance for higher education. But both of these opportunities are tied to a GPA. When I was at the Thunder Mountain High School, sign up for classes for your junior, your incoming senior, another mom was talking to me, and I was most disheartened when she said that her son was not going to attempt an honors or an AP class because they're worried about their GPA and they really need the money for scholarship. Better that they get an A in a regular class than attempt an honors class. And I know that this subject has come up over the years when I've lived here, usually around high school graduation time. Parents write letters to the editor and this comes out. I know the board has discussed this off and on over the years. Can you please tell us where the board is at with this discussion and what your thoughts are on this?
I'm not sure that the GPA alone, I think the Alaska Performance Scholarship does have expectations and ties money to a GPA. So it is a well-intended but maybe not well thought out plan. And I'm not an expert in the college expectations, but having talked to a number of university registrars, they're no longer emphasizing, at the expense of everything else, GPA. They are looking for a high-performing student. They're looking for a student who has challenged himself or herself. They're looking for a student who has taken on leadership responsibility. So if you have a 3.5 or above, in some cases a 3.25 or above, and you've taken advanced placement classes, and you've gotten involved in leadership activities, that doesn't mean necessarily student council. Could be, but it could be volunteering at the hospital. It could be volunteering at a local daycare. It's something that says, I provide service to other people. Then your opportunities for admission are pretty strong. Here in Juneau, Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's kind of the formula. The funding issue is a different issue. The value, and while AVID isn't for every kid in our school, the value of AVID is that we have far more students. It's an expectation of the program that you will take an advanced placement or honors class from the time you enter. So the expectations are very high. There are some circumstances for some funding sources where you have to play a GPA game and you just have to decide whether you're going to play it or not. Good question.
Hello, I have a child that's in the special education part of it, and you say that you're looking at cutting paraeducators out, but yet
I don't believe there's even enough. My child also requires a one-on-one staffing. It seems to me that that's not happening. And the fact that, it's so hard to communicate with some of these paraeducators because you can't talk to the paraeducators. The ones that is dealing with your child on a day in and day out basis, they have to report to the teacher, then the teacher can talk to you. To me, that's ridiculous. And, with that whole staffing issue, my daughter is there, and it says right in her IEP, do not feed. Yet, we go there, we're finding out she's having 2 lunches a day. She brings one and then tells the teacher that she didn't bring one. They don't even check, they just give her some food. And this is the part of where you're cutting a budget on paraeducators to some of these students that really need this help. And I'm lost and baffled. And I don't even know, we've been doing this a long time. And, she's in her very last year of high school, and she's been 2 years in the transition program, and it's crazy.
Thanks, I appreciate the comment. The paraeducator the paraeducators wouldn't be in contact with students any less. I'm not sure that the issue you described, which would be concerning to me, as it appears to be to you, is an issue about staffing. It's an issue, sounds more like an issue about communication and delivering on expectations. And I'd be happy to help you with that.
Let's take one more. Lance, I'm sure you have a profound question.
Well, now I've been set up. My question was really easy, or hopefully easy. There's a couple of things that I read in the paper that had me concerned, or I've always questioned one, the early release Mondays and what the status of that is, and the impacts that has on the students, the teachers, also parents and daycare.
Right.
Always an issue. But then where I read that you were thinking of cutting spring break from the schedule so that we could do better on our tests, and I'm not quite sure that. I guess I have questions about that. Wouldn't you just move spring break till after the test and you're working for a job well done, not just eliminate it and say do better? I guess that's where I was going with that.
Thanks. Easy, you said.
Yeah.
Actually, they are pretty easy. I want to talk first about the early release. We are incredibly aware that early release, having students leave school before they typically do, changes the logistics of a family. So we don't enter into the early release notion lightly. If we're going to strengthen what teachers do in classrooms, in that instructional core, we need time to develop that. And we don't have the money to pay them to stay longer, work extra days, those kinds of things. So we do an early release. It's a fairly common practice in lots and lots of communities. The issue for us, to be honest, the issue for us isn't whether we have early release or not. We really believe pretty strongly in the model and acknowledge the inconvenience it creates for families. But for me, it's just a matter of we have to get this investment made in terms of teachers' work with kids. So we have some contractual things we have to work out with our Teachers Association. We're doing a survey right now among them to see kind of where they stand. So stay tuned. Probably sometime in the next 6 weeks we'll solidify the early release question or not. Let's talk about spring break. The process of developing a calendar happens with a committee. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. The committee's job is to develop 2 proposals, and they have done that. One of the proposals is that we would eliminate spring break and just have the kids go home for the summer earlier. There are some reasons why that causes us to wonder. Caused me to wonder when they came up with it. But it's not my job to step between a committee that the board has convened and that committee's recommendation to the board. At some point, the board will want, like Tuesday, a recommendation. Our recommendation will be really clear for a lot of reasons. There are a multitude of reasons in Juneau that a spring break is necessary. One is people are ready to get out. The other is, and it is equally important, is gold medal. Gold medal is a phenomenal community institution that is held during spring break. And I couldn't believe the first one I saw. And I can't tell you how many different people have come to me, not to mention the committee, to talk about gold medal. I was talking with Lori Scandling yesterday, who we will miss tremendously. And I asked her about the feedback. She said it's about 7-1, that spring break's really important. So my guess is that by about 6:45 Tuesday night, we'll have a calendar and it'll include spring break. So, and we got 2 board members sitting here in the room, and I don't know what they're thinking about me right now, but I don't see a scenario in which we wouldn't have a spring break. Thanks, guys.